Chicago was wrapped in white that night, the kind of snow that swallowed up every sound until all you heard was the crunch of your own boots. The wind slapped my face raw, and by the time I reached the front doors of my restaurant, the warmth spilling from inside felt almost unreal. Golden light garlands tied with deep red ribbons, fairy lights strung across the ceiling. It smelled like roasted garlic, cinnamon, and browned butter. I paused in the doorway, brushing the snow from my coat sleeve, letting the sounds inside drift toward me. Cutlery chimed softly against porcelain voices rising and falling like waves. Every year Christmas Eve filled this room, and tonight was no different. The corner booth, the one people waited months to reserve, sat ready under the glow of brick and candlelight. My family was already gathered. My mother lifted her hand high as if I'd been away too long, and my aunts spoke over each other with warmth that spilled past the table. I slipped into my usual seat at the edge where I could see both the bar and the kitchen line. Elena, my shift manager, moved past with the kind of look that lasted just a heartbeat enough for us both to know the rhythm was steady. I wore no name tag. I didn't need to announce who I was here. Then the door opened again and snow pushed in before it closed behind Michael. He always made an entrance coat, buttoned neatly, scarf arranged just right, his smile wider than it needed to be. Timing was his specialty. Never late, never quiet. Guess what? Everyone, he said loud enough that nearby tables tilted their heads. The VIP booth is ours tonight. The owner here, my college buddy. One call and it was done. The table lit up with admiration. My mother's face brightened. My uncle gave a firm nod. Connections matter, he said, as if it were a family motto. Behind me, the rhythm of forks on plates faltered. A few strangers leaned back in their chairs, curious. Elena's hand tightened briefly on her notepad before she kept moving. I smiled the kind of smile that asks nothing in return. No one here knew about the second loan I'd taken for the kitchen upgrade, or the late nights scrubbing dishes when the washer broke. They saw only the polished room and the food set in front of them. That was enough for them. Cheers. Michael raised a glass of Barolo, one I usually saved for guests who celebrated milestones. We're VIPs tonight, thanks to my connections. Merry Christmas. The glasses clinked together, laughter spread, and a cousin leaned in with a grin. Michael always comes through. You couldn't get this table even months ahead. I pressed my lips into a smile and said nothing. The scent of rosemary drifted from the kitchen with the prime rib, and I let it fill the space where my words might have been. Michael leaned back, continuing his story about his so-called college friend, the owner. Nobody questioned it. They drew closer, listening. Elena appeared again, placing oysters on the table with practiced ease. On the house, she said. Michael puffed up like someone had handed him a medal. I rose last, letting the others shuffle forward first. Elena brushed close to me and murmured, B3 set. Staff ready. I nodded once, catching Tom's glance behind the bar as he shook a Negroni, his expression steady. The booth gleamed under the lights. Linen-pressed flat candles casting soft shadows. I let my fingers rest briefly on the fabric. Every detail had been chosen by me, but tonight it was Michael who carried the story. Since it's friends looking after us, Michael said with a wink toward Elena, let's not be shy with the special menu. Her smile held steady. I'll check with the right person. The family settled in, voices low with admiration, repeating the word VIP as though it gave the evening extra weight. Michael lifted his glass again, his eyes flicking to me. See, sis, stick with me and you'll always be taken care of. I met his gaze, my mouth curving only slightly. I see that. Under the table, I tapped a short message on my phone screen, resting against my knee, B3. Q1. The green light on the POS system blinked. Elena leaned casually against the brick column, keeping the next table from looking over. In the kitchen, the ladle struck the skillet 3 times, a signal only we would notice. Elena bent closer to me, her voice low. VIP is ready, ma'am. I gave her a nod. Just as we planned. Around me, Michael was still talking, and the family leaned in, hanging on every word. I let them. I wanted them to hold on to that version of him for just a little longer. Outside, snow kept falling thick. Inside, the music swelled. I breathed in the citrus mist from a fresh twist over a cocktail and said to no one in particular, almost under my breath, "Let the show begin." Chapter 2. Family Favoritism. The table stretched long under a blanket of white linen, every glass and fork arranged like choreography. The smell of roasted garlic and basil filled the air as waiters slipped between chairs with well-practiced ease. Antipasto platters landed first olives, slick with oil curls of prosciutto, and cheeses sharp enough to bite back. Then came bowls of pasta steam curling up like ribbons, heavy with the tang of fresh tomato and basil. It should have been comforting, but every cent, every clink of silver only reminded me how much I didn't belong in this moment. I sat near the end, close enough to watch, but far enough to remain unnoticed. That was my place after all. Michael filled the other end of the table as though the evening had been arranged around him, his laughter rising above the rest, his gestures pulling attention in his direction. Everyone leaned closer, eager to catch his words. Mom sat at the head in her crimson velvet dress posture straight, her pearls catching the light. She reached across to touch Michael's sleeve, her voice carrying easily over the noise. "My son always knows how to take care of this family. Always dependable. Not like some people who spend their time in a small restaurant." She didn't mention me by name. She never needed to. The glances that drifted down the table did the work for her brief quick before settling back on Michael as if nothing had been said. Uncle Joe lifted his glass, his laugh short and certain. "Michael really is the backbone of this family. We're lucky to have him." The nods came quickly, voices overlapping in agreement. Admiration clung to Michael like a familiar coat. My fork rested motionless on my plate. Under the table, my hand curled around my palm until warmth spread through the pressure. It was the only way I reminded myself that I was still part of this room. I had grown up with this arrangement. Report cards, school assemblies, first jobs. Michael had always been the one who stood in the light, the one I was measured against, and the one I never quite reached. And here, in a place built for my own long nights and quiet sacrifices, the pattern remained unchanged. My father sat beside Mom, eyes lowered to his plate. Sometimes I wondered whether he heard what I did, whether he noticed the way silence settled over me. But silence was his habit too, and he kept it well. I could have spoken. I could have reminded them that the rent cleared because of me, that each plate on the table had passed through a kitchen I worked to hold together. But I knew the outcome. If I spoke, they would dismiss it as jealousy. If I corrected them, they would call it insecurity. So I stayed quiet. One day I thought the truth would appear without me having to announce it. That was when Emily joined in. She leaned toward Michael's sequins on her dress, catching every flicker of candlelight. Her dark hair framed her smile careful, and polished her glass of wine tilted as though the moment itself was staged. She let the wine circle in her glass before lifting her eyes to me. "Bella, you really are lucky to have such a successful brother to lean on. Not everyone gets to sit at a table like this, you know." Her laugh was soft, almost musical, as if it carried no edge. But the pause it left behind at the table said enough. Laughter followed, spreading quickly, glasses lifted again, forks tapping against plates. Someone gave me a look that hovered between pity and amusement, the kind reserved for mistakes too small to matter but too visible to ignore. My chest tightened. My breath felt heavier, but I kept my face still. I managed a smile, thin, polite enough to pass. Inside it pressed against me, but I let it remain there, hidden. Emily drank again, satisfied. Michael leaned back, one arm stretched casually behind her chair, his expression easy as if the room belonged to him. Mom's eyes shone with pride, her approval almost brighter than the lights above. I tightened my grip on the napkin in my lap, its rough fabric grounding me. Words crowded at the back of my throat, but I swallowed them. Not now. Because here was the truth I didn't need to defend myself. The way they spoke, the way they laughed, the way they ignored what stood in plain sight, those things built their own story. And when the moment came, when the mask slipped from Michael's face, no one would need me to explain. So I stayed where I was quiet, offering only a faint smile, letting the weight of it rest where it landed. And I promised myself firmly and without drama that this would be the last time anyone at this table looked at me with pity. The laughter and clinking glasses from the Christmas table blurred into a distant hum. In my mind, I wasn't in that warm, candlelit dining room anymore. I was back in 2015, standing on a cracked tile floor inside the restaurant my grandparents had built in the 1970s, holding a heavy ring of keys that felt less like a gift and more like a responsibility I hadn't asked for. That year, my parents packed their bags for Florida, eager for golf courses, early bird specials, and sunshine. They left me the family restaurant in Chicago, an inheritance wrapped in peeling paint, unpaid invoices, and whispers of decline. Some might have imagined pride in that moment, a legacy passed down with honor. But to me, it looked like a ship taking on water, and I had been handed the wheel. I remember unlocking the front door that first morning. The air carried a dampness that no amount of scrubbing could erase, part mildew, part fryer oil, lingering in the walls. The booths sagged where families once crowded, and wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the neon sign outside buzzed with uneven light. Behind the numbers in the books, the truth was starker. Business had collapsed. Regulars had drifted away, and the bank was already pressing in. $400,000 in debt hung over me, a number I could barely bring myself to say aloud. The staff, what few remained, looked at me with a mix of weariness and doubt. They had seen owners come and go, and now they had me, the daughter who in their eyes was unlikely to last. Some didn't wait to see how long I'd endure. They left quietly without ceremony, leaving me to fill the gaps however I could. So I did everything. I greeted customers with practiced smiles, even when worry tightened my chest. I carried trays, refilled glasses, and when the last table left, I tied on an apron and worked at the sink until my hands turned raw from detergent. The sound of dishes clattering against steel basins followed me into the night. I walked home in the early hours, clothes damp from steam fingers, wrinkled and sore, only to lie awake staring at the ceiling, calculating how long I could keep going. And then came the weekly phone calls. My mother's voice slipped through the line calm, but edged with judgment only she could deliver. "Bella, sweetheart, don't wear yourself down. Sell the place. Let it go. Restaurants are no life for you. You should focus on family, on something easier." She didn't raise her voice, but the words settled heavily. She believed she was advising me with care, but what I heard was plain: I wasn't the right one for this. If it had been Michael holding those keys, they would have called him ambitious, capable, even visionary. With me, it was always framed as stubbornness, misplaced effort, and inability to see reason. By 2017, I was worn thin. The debt loomed, the long nights of wiping down counters with no one beside me hollowed out my resolve. I remember one evening in particular, sitting in the cramped office at the back under the glare of a single fluorescent bulb. Paper sprawled across the desk, invoices, overdue notices, red-stamped envelopes. In the middle lay a contract. All I had to do was sign, and the burden would shift. Someone else would take over, pay the bank, and I could step away. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled from fatigue and hesitation. For a moment, I felt the strange relief of imagining what life could be without this weight pressing on me. Freedom was one line of ink away, but my eyes drifted up to the wall above the desk. A crooked black and white photo hung there, my grandmother on the restaurant's opening day apron, tied neatly hairpinned, smile steady. She looked proud, not of wealth or fame, but of creating something that could feed people, hold families, carry a name. I could almost hear her voice the way she used to speak when I helped fold napkins as a child. "This is ours, Bella. If you don't keep it alive, who will?" The pen slipped from my hand and rolled across the papers. My eyes blurred, and I let the tears fall silently, knowing no one else would see. In that quiet, I made my choice. I would not hand it over. I would not let her work fade away, and I would not let Michael's predictions about me become true. That night in that cramped office, I set a promise to myself. No more hesitation, no more entertaining the thought of leaving. From then on, there was only one path forward: to carry the restaurant steady and unflinching until it could stand again, even if I had to do it alone. The clinking of forks against porcelain and the warm hum of chatter filled the restaurant. From where I sat, it felt like I wasn't part of the celebration at all, but an audience member watching a play whose ending I already knew. My brother Michael was as always the center of attention. He leaned back in his chair, the light above catching on his cufflinks, as though he had positioned himself deliberately. The servers poured red wine into crystal glasses, the deep color reflecting the glow of the Christmas tree in the corner. Michael lifted his glass with a pause, like someone about to deliver a practice speech. Russo Real Estate LLC. He began, stretching each word for effect, is negotiating million-dollar projects. Very soon the Chicago market will have my name on it. I didn't need to look around to sense the reaction. The responses came in their usual order: nods of approval, little gasps, and warm flattery. One of my aunts clasped her hands, her voice brimming with admiration. "Michael, you truly are the pride of this family." My mother's smile deepened, her eyes fixed on him with unmistakable pride, as if he had just announced something historic. I glanced down at my own glass. The wine was bitter on my tongue, sharper than I expected. Pride of the family. The phrase echoed a reminder of the distance between what I gave and what was seen. Years of washing dishes late into the night, negotiating overdue bills, and holding this restaurant together with little more than persistence, none of that carried the weight of Michael's polished words. I knew, though, what lay beneath those words. Russo Real Estate was little more than a name on paper, its debts stacking higher than its deals. Projects slipped away, contacts stopped returning calls, and Michael carried the appearance of success without the reality to support it. Yet here tonight, surrounded by relatives eager for a story to repeat to their neighbors, he shone brighter than ever. I felt warmth rise in my chest, but I held my expression steady, my lips forming the kind of smile that revealed nothing. No one wanted the truth. It was easier to repeat Michael's version than to look closely at mine. Then, as the table leaned in toward him, he chose to go further. Michael tilted his glass, swirling the wine slowly, letting the pause stretch just long enough before adding, "And tonight, we're being treated like VIPs, because I happen to know the owner of this fine establishment." The room filled with laughter, glasses raised in approval. Someone even tapped a fork against a glass as though a toast had been called. Under the table, I pressed my hand into my palm until the pressure steadied me. Michael's story wasn't just about imaginary deals. Now he had folded me into his fiction, using my work as a stage for his performance, while I sat only a few feet away. Not everyone reacted with unthinking applause. Across the table, Aunt Olivia straightened in her seat. She had once been a lawyer, long retired now, but her gaze carried the same quiet scrutiny I remembered from my childhood. She didn't laugh. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her lips pressed together. For a moment she looked at Michael and then just briefly at me. It wasn't much, only a flicker, but it was enough to register. A question in her eyes, maybe even recognition. I looked back into my glass, steadying my breath. I didn't move to correct him, didn't push back. Let him have his applause. The louder the room grew, the more fragile his claims became. Inside, though, something settled into place. Let him talk. Let him enjoy the comfort of their admiration. Every story he told tonight was a thread that would not hold forever. And when the moment arrived, when his fabric of words finally unraveled, I would not need to say anything at all. The carols floating through the speakers were meant to sound cheerful, but to me they carried the hollow ring of a sales jingle played on repeat. The restaurant glittered with lights, the polished silverware caught every reflection, and the chatter swelled around me like a rehearsed script. Yet under the laughter and clinking of glasses, something had shifted. Michael was still in full performance mode, gesturing with his wineglass as if he were conducting the room. His voice carried easily, polished and confident, while the table leaned in, smiling and nodding along. Each story he added seemed to lift him higher, like a balloon bright against the ceiling, fragile and waiting for the smallest touch. I let my gaze travel across the table. My father Frank sat with his arms folded, his brow creasing now and then, a quiet signal that he wasn't convinced. But he stayed silent, as he always did when Michael held the floor. My mother Eleanor, on the other hand, looked radiant, her expression full of pride. To her, every word Michael spoke was another reason to feel assured about the path her son had chosen. I lifted my glass of wine, letting it swirl gently before taking a slow sip. The dryness settled on my tongue, steadying me. I wasn't just part of the gathering. I was the host, though no one seemed to notice. The irony pressed on me, sharp but familiar. That was when Robert approached. His black suit was neatly pressed. His movements measured the kind of presence that never demanded attention, yet commanded respect. He stopped at our table, a new bottle of wine in hand. For just a moment his eyes met mine, and in that glance there was a question. "Do you want me to step in?" My breath caught, but I gave the faintest shake of my head. Not yet. I wanted Michael to reveal himself fully. If I interrupted, they would dismiss me as bitter or envious. But if his stories stretched too far, if they collapsed under their own weight, then the truth would arrive on its own. Robert's lips curved slightly before he turned back to the family. He poured the wine with practiced care, then straightened. "It's our honor to serve you tonight," he said, his tone even polite. Michael's grin widened, taking Robert's words as confirmation of his tale. He leaned back in his chair, comfortable, assured, as if the evening had unfolded exactly to his design. The family followed suit. Murmurs of approval passed around the table. Glasses were raised. My mother's eyes glistened with pride, and she dabbed lightly at the corner of her eye with a napkin. I looked down at the table setting, catching a faint reflection of myself in the polished surface of the vase. My face looked calm, perhaps even distant, but I could feel the quiet pressure building beneath. Every laugh, every nod of approval given to Michael seemed to pull the room tighter, a string stretched close to breaking. And yet within that tension, I felt a surprising calm. There was no need to rush, no need to push back. Michael was weaving his own net, and every word he spoke tied another knot. I raised my glass again, letting it rest lightly against my lips, my eyes fixed on him. He was laughing now, head tilted back, slightly confident in the applause surrounding him. He didn't notice the shift. He didn't see what I saw. Inside, I whispered to myself, almost like a quiet reminder, "Keep talking, Michael. Every step you take tonight brings you closer to the edge." The laughter swirled around me like cigarette smoke, heavy and choking, impossible to escape. Plates clattered, carols kept playing overhead, and the smell of rosemary chicken lingered in the air. Yet I could feel Emily's stare fixed on me across the table. She hadn't looked away once since she sat down, not even when Michael lifted his glass for another story. Her lips curved in a smile that stopped short of her eyes. She set her glass down with deliberate care, the stem tapping lightly against the linen enough to draw attention without breaking the flow of conversation. Then, tilting her head slightly, she spoke in a voice pitched just sweet enough to sound casual. "Bella," she said, "you know, most of my friends back in New York already have these incredible careers. Some of them are CEOs, real executives. And you? Well, you're still keeping busy with that little restaurant of yours, aren't you?" The words landed softly, but I felt the weight of them. A cousin let out a small gasp. Utensils paused mid-air. Then came the ripple of half-laughs, like people reacting to a joke they weren't sure they should find funny. My mother leaned in quickly, her pearls catching the light. "Oh, Emily's just teasing," she said, glancing briefly at me before turning back with a smile for her future daughter-in-law. She has a playful sense of humor. But everyone at the table knew it wasn't teasing. It was a choice of words meant to place me neatly in a box in front of them all. I pressed the napkin in my lap until the fabric wrinkled against my palm. Part of me wanted to push back to remind her of the nights I'd spent closing the restaurant alone or the mornings when I unlocked the doors before dawn. But I stayed quiet. The silence that followed stung more than Emily's words. No one challenged her. No one leaned in to soften the moment. Their glances held a kind of quiet agreement, a shared understanding that what she said matched what they already believed. Michael sat back, his arm resting easily behind Emily's chair. He didn't add anything he didn't need to. Her words had already carried his intent. Emily lifted her glass again, sipping slowly before she continued. "It's really quite lucky for you, though," she said, her eyes meeting mine briefly. "Not everyone gets to sit at a VIP table like this, thanks to Michael." This time the laughter came more freely, louder, like the family had been given permission to enjoy the moment. It was holiday cheer wrapped around something else. I raised my head, forcing a small smile, though my chest felt tight. The sound of glasses, the glow of candles, the easy rhythm of conversation, all of it blurred together. Still, I didn't move. I told myself I wouldn't give Emily or Michael what they wanted, a reaction. However pointed their words, however isolating the room felt, I would remain still. Then I noticed Sophie, my youngest sister. Her fork hovered above her plate untouched. Her eyes shifted between me and Emily, uneasy. Her lips parted slightly as if she might speak, but she didn't. It wasn't much, but it was something. In a room full of people comfortable with laughter at my expense, her hesitation felt like the faintest crack in the surface. Small, nearly invisible, but real. I let out a slow breath, lowering my eyes back to my plate. Emily's laugh rang out again, light and effortless, pleased with her victory. But I knew the moment wouldn't hold forever. The napkin in my lap was damp where my hand had pressed it. I smoothed it out carefully, focusing on the texture beneath my fingers. My thoughts steadied. One day, the silence of tonight would turn, and Emily, with her careful smile and rehearsed charm, would find herself in a room where every glance saw her clearly. For now, though, I simply nodded, lifted my glass, and pretended the bitterness on my tongue was just the wine. Emily's words still echoed in my ears, but my mind slipped away from that crowded Christmas table back to the 2 years that had nearly broken me and then saved me. 2018 wasn't the kind of year you'd frame in gold. It was the kind that left you exhausted, uncertain, and wondering why you hadn't stepped away when you had the chance. By January, the restaurant was on the edge. I remember staring at the ledger late one night, the numbers refusing to balance no matter how many times I recalculated. The red marks filled the page, impossible to ignore. I knew I had a choice: follow my mother's repeated advice and sell, or commit fully and risk that this would be the last chance. I chose to commit. It was not a story of sudden success. I returned to the bank, asking for a smaller loan, just enough to buy time. I pulled down the faded wallpaper with my own hands until my fingers blistered. I worked with a young designer from the neighborhood who believed in giving old places new warmth, softer lighting, wooden tables with history, a logo that carried the name but not the weight of the past. The menu shifted: too fresh, pasta rolled each morning, regional wines, desserts. I remembered my grandmother making when I was little. Nights ended in the office at the back, my body sinking into a chair too small to be comfortable. Papers spread across the desk, my head sometimes falling onto them as I dozed. The hum of the refrigerator was often the only sound left when the dining room emptied. I would wake with a stiff neck ink smudged on my arm and the same thought circling: what if it still isn't enough? Then came an unexpected turn. It was a Friday in March, when David Miller walked through the door. At first I didn't recognize him, just a man in his 30s with a camera bag over his shoulder. He ordered the tagliatelle with lamb ragu, asked questions about the wines, scribbled notes while he ate. I treated him as I did anyone, though I noticed the way he observed every detail. 3 days later, one of my servers burst into the office holding her phone out. "Bella, you need to see this." David had uploaded a video, hidden gem in Chicago you can't miss. He filmed the steaming pasta, the golden glow of the dining room, even caught my nervous laugh when he asked for a photo. His words were kind, almost tender. "This place feels like home, but the food is 5-star. Mark my words, this spot is going to explode." And it did. Within a week, the phones didn't stop ringing. By the end of the month, there were lines down the block, people waiting in the cold for a table. I had to expand the staff, more servers, another sous chef, a new reservation system. The debt that once weighed like a stone began to shrink little by little. By summer, the restaurant felt alive in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. Families celebrated anniversaries, couples toasted glasses of Chianti, tourists posed for photos under the new sign. I watched from the corner some nights, letting myself breathe a little easier. But with success came a quieter ache. My family never came. Not once. Michael, however, found his own way of weaving himself into the story. He told people he had helped me, that his connections had brought customers through the door. He made it sound as if the crowds came for him, not for the work poured into every plate. I held my tongue. To argue would have made me sound resentful. So instead, I turned that frustration into longer hours, more attention to detail, making sure no one left without feeling they had been part of something worth remembering. Then came New Year's Eve 2019. The dining room was full to the last chair. Fairy lights stretched across the ceiling. The sound of laughter and glasses rising filled the air. I stood at the edge, taking it in, the warmth, the noise, the sense of something larger than myself. For once, it wasn't just a restaurant. It felt like a heartbeat. When the clock struck midnight, I clinked glasses with Robert, my manager, who had stayed through every difficult turn. "You did it," he said, smiling his words, almost lost in the cheer around us. I looked out across the crowded room, blinking back tears. The loans were cleared. The place was alive again. It was no longer about survival. It had become a space people sought out, a part of their own stories. And yet, when I called home the next day, the conversation was short. My mother didn't ask about the celebration, didn't ask about the full dining room. She was busy talking about Michael's latest project, a real estate deal that hadn't yet broken ground. "You should be proud of your brother," she said. "He's really going places." I hung up, sitting alone in the restaurant that still smelled faintly of champagne. The chairs were stacked, the tables cleared. I ran my hand across the polished wood, quietly filling the room that had been overflowing with joy hours earlier. No matter how far I carried this place in their eyes, I remained beneath him. And now, back at that Christmas dinner table in the present, with Michael basking in praise, and Emily tossing barbs at me like confetti, the bitterness rose again. They didn't know. They had no idea that every bite of food they were enjoying tonight, every sip of wine, every light strung above them, it was all me. My work, my years, my persistence. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile, letting the memory fade as the present snapped back into focus. Michael was laughing loudly, Emily clinking her glass against his. My parents nodded along, soaking in his bravado. But deep inside me, the fire roared hotter than ever. I knew the truth, and soon enough they would too. The clinking of silverware and glasses kept the room buzzing, but underneath the cheer there was a hum of tension. Michael had found his rhythm, his voice carrying easily across the table like someone who was never tired of his own stories. Real estate deals, influential friends' investments that would change the skyline of Chicago. He painted them all with broad strokes, and most of my family leaned in as though each word were gospel. But not Olivia. My aunt sat near the end of the table, her back straight, one hand resting lightly on the stem of her glass. She wasn't nodding, she wasn't smiling, and she wasn't offering the polite "how impressive" that flowed so naturally from the others. Her eyes stayed on Michael, steady and watchful, as if she were weighing each word rather than taking them at face value. Michael noticed. He lifted his glass toward her, his grin widening as if trying to draw her into the warmth of his performance. Olivia didn't lift hers. She tilted her head slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was calm and level, yet it carried through the table more clearly than the chatter. "Michael," she said, "if you really know the owner here the way you say, then you must also know whose name is on the business license hanging on that wall." The air shifted. Even the music overhead seemed to dim. For the first time that evening, Michael's grin faltered. Only briefly, but enough for me to catch it. A flicker of unease before he masked it again. He leaned back, forcing out a chuckle. "Oh, Aunt Olivia, you know how these things go. Owners have managers, representatives, investors. Why would I waste time over some little piece of paper?" It was meant to sound casual, but his tone thinned on the word paper. People shifted in their seats. Some looked toward the wall where the license hung, though tonight it was hidden behind the oversized Christmas tree I had insisted on decorating myself. A quiet irony, the truth was there in plain sight, obscured only by tinsel and light. My mother moved quickly to fill the pause, her fork clinking as she set it down. "Olivia, it's Christmas. Must you question your nephew? Michael has always had good reasons for what he does. He's done more for this family than anyone. More than anyone." The words landed with the familiar weight. I stared into my glass, the rim catching the glow of the candles. My mother's loyalty was unshakable, her voice protective in a way I had never known directed at me. She had chosen her place long ago, and it wasn't at my side. Olivia didn't press further. She lifted her glass, sipped, and set it down again with a faint click that seemed louder than the laughter around her. She said nothing more, but the silence she left behind was heavy, and Michael avoided her eyes for a moment longer than he intended. The conversation stumbled back to safer ground. My uncle mentioned a football game, a cousin asked for more bread, and my mother guided the spotlight back to Michael's projects. But a shift had happened. Small, thin, but real. Olivia's question had unsettled the surface. I caught Michael's knee bouncing under the table, a sheen of sweat forming near his hairline. Around the room, I sensed the faintest hesitation in how people looked at him. It wasn't disbelief, not yet, but it was no longer unquestioning faith. I leaned back, steadying my breath. The urge to smile tugged at me, but I held it in. This was how it would begin. Not with a declaration, not with me shouting to be heard. It would begin quietly with a seed of doubt until the ground beneath Michael's stories shifted on its own. He raised his glass again, louder, now pushing his voice to cover the murmurs. Anyway, as I was saying, my next deal is practically set. Multi-million-dollar project just waiting on signatures. This time next year, you'll all be thanking me. His bravado filled the space again, but Olivia's gaze remained on him, calm and unwavering. She didn't need to add another word. Her silence had already done its work. I drew in a slow breath, letting it settle in my chest. Inside, the thought formed steady as a promise. They still choose to believe the lies, but no mask lasts forever. And tonight, Michael will be the one to take it off. The main course had just arrived, plates gleaming under the soft golden lights, steam curling into the air like ribbons. Lobster tails, roast beef. Carved to precision, truffle mashed potatoes, dishes I had spent years perfecting for this restaurant, the same dishes I once thought would bring my family together. And yet the warmth I had dreamed of was missing. Instead, the air hung heavy, filled by the sound of Michael's voice. He was in his element. Leaning back in his chair, shoulders relaxed, one hand cradling a glass of wine, he looked like someone certain that the evening revolved around him. Every chuckle, every nod, every indulgent smile from the table seemed to add fuel to his performance. Then he clapped his hands together, sharp enough to startle the young server who had just placed a basket of fresh bread in front of us. "Hey, bring us the chef's special seafood platter," he said, his hand waving as though issuing a casual order to an employee. "And make it quick. The owner and I go way back." The server froze, eyes darting nervously toward Robert, who stood at the far end of the dining room. His hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough for me to see the discomfort on his face. Michael, oblivious or perhaps unconcerned, pressed on. "And while you're at it," he added louder now, "uncork your best Cabernet, the most expensive one you've got. We're not waiting around like regular customers tonight." The table erupted in laughter. My uncles leaned back in their chairs, slapping the table with approval. My aunts giggled behind their napkins, their eyes sparkling as though Michael's arrogance was entertainment rather than excess. My mother glowed, her pride visible in every angle of her face. I felt my face warm, though not from embarrassment. The feeling rose sharper, steadier, and I forced myself to breathe through it. It wasn't just the lies he told. It was the ease with which he used my staff, my years of effort, as props for his one-man act. Across the room, Robert's eyes found mine. He stood still, posture calm, his expression betraying nothing to the others. But the message in his gaze was clear. "Just one signal. Say the word and this ends." I didn't give it. Not yet. Michael raised his glass again, red wine sloshing near the rim. See that he said, voice booming. "One word from me and everything is handled." That's the kind of respect I get in this city. The table roared once more, voices overlapping in noisy admiration. Forks clattered, glasses clinked, and for a moment it sounded almost like joy. But to me it was the sound of pretense laughter that masked nothing but emptiness. I studied Michael as he basked in the attention. His chest rose with pride, his grin stretched wide, and I thought of the nights I had spent here alone washing dishes until my hands were raw. On the days I stared at numbers on a page, fighting dread as bills piled up. Of the risk of that second loan, the countless hours redesigning menus, rewriting recipes, chasing hope with every ounce of strength. And here he was, claiming it, twisting it into his own triumph. The music overhead played on, but the carols had grown thin, little more than background noise. My fork rested untouched on the edge of my plate, the food cooling in front of me. "Michael, my cousin," Daniel said, cutting into his roast beef. "You really know how to live it up. Not everyone gets treated like this. You're something else." "Damn right," Michael replied, his grin widening. "In this city, my name carries weight." He raised his glass higher, his voice pushing over the chatter. "And tonight proves it. This is what real connections look like. This is what success feels like. More laughter, more toasts, but not from me." My hand tightened around the napkin in my lap. The fabric twisted beneath my fingers, the pressure steady grounding. I could feel my jaw clench as words crowded at the back of my throat. Words I wanted to let loose. Words I wanted them all to hear, but I kept them locked inside. Robert moved closer now, his steps silent across the polished floor. He stopped just behind Michael's chair, his hands folded neatly in front of him, the image of a composed manager. But his eyes flicked to me again, asking the question without sound. Is it time I held his gaze? My breath was even, my heart no longer racing but steady, deliberate. Not yet, I thought. Let him keep going. Let him stretch the illusion until it becomes too fragile to hold. Michael leaned back once more, his laughter rolling out across the table. "You see, around here, all it takes is one mention of me and the red carpet rolls out. No waiting, no hassle. I don't do lines. I don't do ordinary things." The laughter that followed felt thinner now, as though some of them weren't sure whether to keep joining in. A few chuckles wavered. A few glances darted toward Olivia, who sat quietly at the far end of the table. Her eyes fixed on Michael with the same calm intensity she had shown earlier. I caught that detail, small but vital. The seed of doubt she had planted still lingered. Some of them might not admit it, but they were listening differently now. Michael didn't notice. He was too caught up in himself, too loud, too certain. He leaned toward Emily, who laughed on cue, her manicured hand brushing his sleeve, as though he had just told the funniest story of the night. I lifted my glass slowly, the wine touching my lips without drinking. The taste of it lingered sharp and dry, steadying me. Across from me, Sophie, my youngest sister, sat quietly, her fork unmoved. She hadn't laughed since Emily's earlier remark. Now she glanced at me, brief but telling, before lowering her gaze again. It was enough. A sign that not everyone at the table was blind. Robert waited still as stone behind Michael's chair. I gave him the faintest nod, small enough that no one else would notice, but clear enough for him to see. His eyes flickered, a glint of understanding passing through before his expression reset to neutral. The stage was set. The moment was near. Michael leaned back again, raising his glass for yet another toast, his voice filling the room as though it belonged to him alone. My family responded, some with eager clinks of glass, others with half-hearted smiles. But I could sense the shift. The air wasn't as sure as it had been before. I sat back, letting the hum of voices wash over me, the food growing colder, the music still circling above. My pulse was steady now, my mind sharper than it had been in years. He thought the evening belonged to him, but he didn't realize the ground beneath his performance had already begun to crack. I took one last sip of wine, the bitterness sliding across my tongue, and glanced at Robert. This time there was no hesitation. He knew. I knew. The stage was set. The spotlight was waiting. And Michael had no idea the act was about to end. The clinking of glasses, the soft hum of Christmas carols, the faint scrape of forks against porcelain, it all blurred together into a kind of white noise. At that table beneath the candlelight and the glittering ornaments of La Dolce Vita's massive Christmas tree, my brother sat draped in self-importance. Michael leaned back in his chair, a glass of Cabernet balanced in his hand, his smile smug, and settled like a man certain the night belonged entirely to him. He swirled the wine lazily, letting the ruby liquid catch the glow of the candles. Every so often he would tip his head back and laugh loud, sharp, deliberate, the kind of laugh meant to claim space. The family followed suit, chuckles rippling around the table like waves after a stone hits the water. And me. I sat in silence, my fingers brushing the stem of my glass, my eyes trained on Michael, as if watching a play whose ending I already knew. My mother beamed beside him, her face glowing with maternal pride. Sophie sat further down, eyes round, lips parted, caught between awe and confusion. Emily's gaze, however, flicked between me and Michael, her smile curling with condescension. She tilted her glass toward me, as if toasting privately to my supposed irrelevance. That was when Robert stepped forward. He had been waiting near the bar, his posture calm, his eyes never straying too far from me. Robert, who had managed this restaurant for 15 years, who had seen me scrub floors and roll silverware when we had no staff, who had stayed through the worst of it because he believed in me. He moved now with quiet certainty, placing one hand lightly on the back of my chair. His voice carried deep but steady. "Welcome, Ms. Russo, boss. This table, like every Christmas, is reserved for you." The room stilled. The laughter ended mid-breath. Forks were set down, glasses paused halfway to lips. The air itself seemed to draw tight holding. My mother's hand trembled as she adjusted her napkin. Sophie gasped, the glass slipping from her fingers and breaking against the tile in a scatter of shards. Emily set her own glass down too quickly, a dark stain spreading across the tablecloth. And Michael's color drained. His glass wobbled slightly in his hand, his lips moving without sound before he forced a laugh that cracked under its own weight. "You're mistaken," he said, waving a hand as if brushing away an inconvenience. "This table was reserved under my name. I know the owner. We go way back." Robert didn't move, his gaze steady. "No, sir. I've worked here for 15 years. I know the owner, and she is sitting right here." He inclined his head toward me. "She is the owner of La Dolce Vita." The silence that followed carried more weight than all the applause Michael had gathered that evening. One by one, eyes shifted toward me. Admiration that had moments ago been showered on Michael now dissolved into confusion, surprise, and the slow dawning of realization. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it again. His jaw worked, but no words came. I let the stillness expand. The candle flames wavered, the lights on the tree twinkled as before, but the balance of the room had shifted. For the first time, their eyes truly rested on me. At last, I lifted my chin and spoke, my voice calm, deliberate. "You're right about one thing, Michael. This table does belong to the owner. And I am that owner." Emily drew in a sharp breath. Sophie pressed both hands against her mouth. Across the table, my aunt leaned closer to my uncle, whispering quickly. My mother gripped the edge of the cloth, as though bracing herself against a sudden wind. And Michael sat motionless, his expression frozen between disbelief and denial. All the stories he had woven, his supposed connections, his influence, his claim on this very restaurant dissolved in the space of a few sentences. The scaffolding he had built for himself collapsed, not because I tore it down, but because truth revealed the emptiness behind it. I looked at him. My brother, the son my mother had always lifted higher, the one whose shadow I had lived under. And for the first time I felt no need to shrink. I was not the forgotten one, not the lesser one, not the woman with a small restaurant. I was the one with proof, with presence, with a truth that spoke for itself. The play had ended, the mask had fallen, and I was no longer an audience member. I was the spotlight itself. The room felt like it had been drained of oxygen. A few minutes ago, laughter and clinking glasses had filled the air. Now silence pressed down like a heavy curtain, and all eyes bore into Michael. My brother, the self-proclaimed star of the evening, looked suddenly small, pale, and cornered. He rose from his chair too quickly, the legs scraping against the tile. His hands fidgeted with his jacket, tugging at the lapels, as if straightening the fabric might restore his composure. His voice came uneven at first, though he tried to hold on to a tone of confidence. "This is just a misunderstanding," he said. "Bella and we co-manage. Sure, her name's on the paperwork, but I'm the one making the real moves. She's more of a figurehead." A ripple moved through the table, subtle but unmistakable. Some lowered their eyes to their plates. Others exchanged glances that spoke more than words could. My jaw tightened, but I stayed silent. I didn't need to add anything. Olivia. My aunt leaned back in her chair, her arms folded neatly. Even in retirement, she carried the air of a courtroom, composed, incisive, unwilling to let untruth slide. Her voice, calm but precise, cut through the room. Really, Michael? Then perhaps you can explain why the business licenses, the lease agreements, and the tax filings all list Bella as the sole owner. Do you have even one document to prove this partnership you claim? Michael's face seemed to lose more color. A sheen of perspiration appeared at his temple, catching the chandelier light. His lips parted, then pressed closed again. The silence stretched, exposing the gap between his words and reality. Emily shifted beside him. Her fingers had been wrapped tightly around her wine glass, the stem trembling ever so slightly. At last she set it down with a dull tap. Her gaze turned on Michael, sharp and unrelenting, the veneer of charm she had worn all evening stripped away. "You lied," she said quietly, but her voice carried. "Not just to them, to me." Her words were simple, but the weight of them was unmistakable. She slipped the diamond ring from her finger, deliberate, unhurried, and set it on the tablecloth. The sound of it landing was small yet final. "I can't stand beside someone who builds himself on falsehoods. We're done." She didn't wait for him to respond. Gathering her clutch, she rose from her chair. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she crossed the dining room, her back straight, her exit unhurried but resolute. Michael reached out faintly, but his hand stopped short of touching the ring. His eyes darted then to our parents, seeking rescue, his tone desperate now. "Dad, Mom, you know me. You know I wouldn't deceive you. Bella can't run this place on her own. She couldn't possibly enough." The word came from our father, Frank. He stood slowly, his height seeming greater in the hush of the room. He walked around the table, his steps measured, until he came to stand beside me. Then he placed his hand on my shoulder, firm, steady. "I am proud of you, Bella," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the room. "You carried this family's name when no one else would. You built something with your own hands. Something that endures." I swallowed my throat tight. My father's approval was not something I had often known. For years, his words of encouragement had drifted naturally toward Michael. And now, here in front of everyone, he had spoken to me. My mother sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her lips pressed together, her eyes lowered. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Michael. It was as if the weight of her long-held favoritism had finally settled on her shoulders. For the first time, she seemed subdued, her silence saying more than defense ever could. The room held its breath. Then from another table, a voice joined. "I can vouch for that." Heads turned. David Miller rose from his seat. Years ago, his words had helped change the course of my restaurant. Tonight, his presence was unexpected, though perhaps fitting. He stepped closer, his expression relaxed, but his words deliberate. "I've worked with Bella. Her vision, her menus, her persistence, that's what made La Dolce Vita thrive. Without her, this place wouldn't be what it is." There was no applause, no cheers, just a quiet shift, a reordering of perception that settled over the room. Michael lowered himself back into his chair, shoulders slumped. His hands rested flat against the table, motionless. Whatever arguments he might have prepared had slipped from his grasp. The silence that followed no longer felt stifling. It was different now, full of recognition, of recalibration. When I looked around the table, I no longer saw pity in their eyes. No more sidelong glances meant to diminish. Instead, I saw acknowledgement, respect, even a kind of astonishment. For years, Michael had been the center. Tonight, that axis shifted. And Michael had lost everything in a single night. The restaurant no longer felt like a Christmas dinner. It felt like a courtroom where judgment had just been passed, and Michael was the guilty man left standing without a defense. He slumped in his chair, face-pale eyes, glassy sweat beading at his hairline, as though the warmth of the chandelier lights alone had undone him. Every gaze in the room pointed at him. My parents, Aunt Olivia, Sophie, even the distant cousins who had always gravitated toward whoever appeared most successful. Not one pair of eyes carried admiration anymore. The laughter, the applause, the flattery, they had all evaporated. What lingered was silent, steady, and unavoidable. Then Robert stepped forward, calm, deliberate, without haste. He placed a polished wooden plaque on the linen tablecloth directly in front of me. The engraved letters caught the glow of the candles. Reserved for the owner. A few whispers stirred, then quieted quickly. It was no longer a matter of argument. This wasn't about choosing sides. It was fact set in wood, simple and undeniable. I lifted my head and let my eyes sweep across the table. For the first time in years, I wasn't being looked at with pity or dismissal. I wasn't the overlooked daughter or the sibling always compared unfavorably. The eyes on me now carried something different: respect, and beneath that recognition of how wrong they had been. Sophie moved first. My younger sister, who had sat quietly through every condescending remark, every smug boast, every moment of silence that cut deeper than words. She rose from her chair, its legs scraping lightly against the tile, and came quickly to my side. Her arms wrapped around me before I had a chance to react. Her voice trembled against my ear. "I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. I'm proud of you, Bella." The tears that touched my eyes didn't sting the way they once had. They felt lighter, a kind of release. I held her close, then pulled back to see her face, her eyes shining with both regret and admiration. Then came my mother. She hadn't moved. Her silk scarf was twisted between her fingers, the fabric pulled so tightly it seemed it might tear. For a long moment I thought she would remain silent, as she had so often, letting absence speak in place of her words. But then her lips parted. Her voice, though faint, carried through the hush. "Bella, I was wrong. You are the one who carried this family's name. I held Michael too high. I didn't see what was right in front of me. The words were uneven, halting, but they landed with a weight I had waited years to feel. My chest rose sharply, as if something long buried had finally lifted. Tears slipped down my cheeks, not of bitterness, but of long-sought release. My mother for the first time saw me. I smiled through them, keeping my hands clenched in my lap to stay steady. Recognition had come not as a gift, but as something earned through every night. I had doubted myself, yet kept going. But the moment didn't hold long. Michael pushed up suddenly from his chair. His face was flushed now, his breath uneven. "No," his voice cracked rough with urgency. "I'm still the firstborn son. I'm the rightful heir. This doesn't change anything. I deserve it, not her." A fork dropped somewhere near the end of the table, the clatter startling in the silence. My brother's hands balled his shoulders, drawn high. He looked not triumphant now, but cornered, grasping at the remnants of a claim that had already slipped away. Then Olivia rose. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. Her years in the courtroom had taught her how measured words could carry more weight than any outburst. "Michael," she said evenly, "inheritance is not about being loud. It is about truth. Tonight you revealed your own falsehoods. You are not a partner, you are not an heir, and you have no claim here. That is the reality." Her eyes stayed on him, steady, unwavering. For a moment Michael's chest heaved as if he would argue, but the words never came. Slowly the fight left him, his posture sinking. He reached for his chair, but instead of sitting, he let it fall backward, the wooden legs clattering against the floor. Without picking it up, he turned toward the door. His steps were unsteady. His shadow stretched long across the tiles. No one moved to stop him. No one called his name. The door opened, then closed behind him. Beyond the glass, snow drifted steadily under the streetlight, his figure swallowed by the quiet night. Inside, silence lingered, yet it no longer felt suffocating. It was different now, settled, grounded, as though something long unresolved had finally found its shape. Someone exhaled audibly. A glass was set softly back on the table. My own chest expanded, the tightness easing for the first time in years. What filled me wasn't triumph. It wasn't the sharpness of victory. It was peaceful. I straightened, looking around at faces I had known all my life. Their expressions had changed, no longer tinted with pity or superiority. Now they carried reverence, even awe. For the first time, they weren't overlooking me. They were listening. That Christmas night, I didn't just reclaim the truth. I reclaimed my place within this family. I was no longer the shadow behind my brother's claims. I was the anchor, the one who had endured, the rightful heir to the work that had been entrusted to me. And I know now no mask can last forever. Sooner or later, the truth finds its way through. So let me ask you something. If it were you, if your family dismissed you, belittled you, while they cheered for a lie, would you stay silent? Or would you stand and let the truth be